Welcome back. Now, it's the SNP's spring conference in Edinburgh this weekend, and the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, will say later that it's time for Scotland to become independent. Well, the SNP's leader in Westminster, Ian Blackford, has taken a break from his speech prep to talk to us this morning. Thank you very much for being on the programme today. So
we're happy to be with you.
We're expecting to hear from Nicola Sturgeon later, talking about the reasons that she thinks there needs to be another Scottish independence referendum. Are you worried that some people will think that you should be focusing on some of the really crucial and critical issues in Scotland domestically, rather than pushing for independence at this time?
Well, you know, the SNP has been in government in Edinburgh since 2007, to 12 years, and if you look at what's happening, you look at many of the polls that have come out over the course of the last few days and the popularity of the SNP, or indeed of the attractions for independence, I think you can see that there is a wide demonstration of public support for what the SNP is doing. And I think there's a very sharp contrast with the chaos that you see at Westminster of a government that's not working for anybody, and certainly not working for the benefit of the people of Scotland. And here we have an SNP government that is getting on with the day job. You were talking earlier about climate change, but of course we've got world-leading climate change targets here in Scotland. We're prepared to go further. But I think in all these key issues, what we've done is we've shown leadership. And I have to say this, Sophie, we're now 20 years on from devolution. 20 years, Scotland has changed dramatically. And I think our message to the people of Scotland is, you like what we've delivered on education and on health. The fact that we don't have tuition fees in Scotland is another clear example. The time now is to complete that journey and to make sure that we can protect the economic interests of the people of Scotland by being an independent country in the European Union. It's about making Scotland a destination. It's about making sure we've got the powers to grow the economy, make sure we've got the powers so we can invest in health and education, that we can eradicate poverty in Scotland, we can deliver a fairer society. So there's a very sharp contrast with the agenda that the Scottish National Party has and our aspirations for Scotland, and what we see is a UK that's becoming increasingly inward-looking, very much focused on Brexit, turning its back on free movement of people. We don't want to have anything to do with that.
Hang on a minute there. You're saying there that people like what the SNP are doing, things such as education. But actually there's been a lot of criticism, hasn't there, about the education at the minute in Scotland. I mean, if you look at the 2015 PISA report, for example, I mean, that's the most latest one, even though it is a couple of years ago. Scottish schools recording their worst ever performance, scores for maths, reading and science all declining. I mean, it's not as if it's a really rosy picture on education, is it?
No, I think there's a lot of change in education, but I think the harsh reality is, and John Swinney, who is our Education Secretary, gave an outstanding speech yesterday about how we're closing the attainment gap, how people from poorer backgrounds are having increasing chances of going on to university. University places for Scottish students has increased dramatically over the course of the last 10-year period. There is, I mean, we're very serious about closing that attainment gap. That is working, and we'll continue that progress over the course of the next few years. I think we've actually got a very proud record when it comes to educational attainment.
I mean, Nicola Sturgeon said she wanted to make education her #1 priority, and yet, you know, very recently we've seen stories from Reform Scotland, for example, saying there's been a reduction in the number of courses that Scottish school children can study. Holyrood's Education Committee hearing evidence that in some schools 14-year-olds and 18-year-olds are being taught in the same class. I mean, you're talking a lot about universities, but when it comes to schools, surely there are things that you should be focusing on now to try and improve what many families and children are experiencing.
Well, of course, we've had the introduction of the national curriculum here in Scotland, something that was supported on a cross-party basis. And what we're seeking to do is to make sure that we're preparing young people for life after school. And as a very key element of that is the increased depth that we're seeing in the subjects that Scottish school children are learning. So, of course, I think it's more important to make sure that the quality and the value of that education improves. That's very much what is happening. The Scottish Government wants to make sure that there's enough depth and breadth in the curriculum which has been offered to young people, and we're making very clear that that is our priority.
OK. Now, we know, of course, that Nicola Sturgeon is talking later about the reasons for another independence referendum. You mentioned a little bit earlier in the interview some of the polling, which has shown a slight increase for support for another referendum. But at the same time, it's not exactly a decisive surge. I mean, the YouGov Times poll, for example, support for Scotland leaving up to 49%. It's still not over that 50% barrier, is it?
Well, the fact is we've spent the last 3 years trying to see if we can get a compromise on Brexit. We've talked about there not been any such thing as a good Brexit. We think that all of the United Kingdom should stay in the European Union, but at the very least we should have stayed in the single market and the customs union, because that would have given the best protection for jobs. So that's been our focus. So over the course of the last few years, we've not been talking about independence. What we've signalled this week is that we're making that determination that independence is the best option for the people of Scotland, and we're going to be going out on the doorsteps over the coming weeks and months, and we'll be presenting that case, the vision that we have of a prosperous, independent Scotland, a socially just Scotland. And that starting position is one where support for independence is virtually neck and neck with the status quo. And if I may say so, Sophie, there is a poll out this morning in the Sunday Times that shows very clearly, in the light of a no-deal scenario, then support for independence would increase quite dramatically. But I'm looking forward, along with colleagues, to having that debate about what is the future for Scotland. And we want to encourage other parties to engage in that debate with us as well. We believe that independence is the best option, but let's build a political consensus. Let's make sure that we can actually have that debate about how we can deliver sustainable economic growth in Scotland. How do we improve the life chances of the people of Scotland? And I'd simply say to the people of Scotland is that since we've had devolution 20 years ago, Scotland has changed. It's changed for the better. We need to make sure that we are that destination in Europe, that we do have access to free movement of people. That's so critical if we're to grow the Scottish economy. If we don't have that, then we won't have that ability to deliver sustainable economic growth to the extent that we want. And there's a sharp contrast of the immigration policies which are being pursued by the Conservative government, and that openness, that desire to make sure that people can come and live and work and be part of Scotland's story, and indeed that opportunity that we should have as a right to live and work in 28 EU member states as well. So there's a very sharp divide in terms of what we see as that positive message that we're delivering, and contrasting that with a UK which is turning inwards on itself. I actually quite firmly believe that when we have that debate with the people of Scotland, support for independence will rise markedly. We will complete that journey to independence. Scotland will become an independent country. And I'd simply say to Westminster that you have to respect that when the SNP won the election to the Scottish Parliament in 2016, it was with a manifesto commitment that if there was a material change in circumstances, that we had to have that right to have that referendum. The people of Scotland are sovereign and should be able to determine their own future, and Westminster should listen to that.
The way, though, to stop a no-deal Brexit from happening is to effectively sign up to some kind of deal. And what's been pretty clear from the votes that have been held in the House of Commons is the thing that seems to be the most likely path to building a majority is a customs union. I mean, last time it failed by just 8 votes, so why didn't the SNP back that?
Well, what the SNP did back was a motion that supported single market and customs union, because let's remember that services are 80% of our economy, and a customs union does not protect the service economy. And the one thing that I've continually mentioned is that importance of free movement of people. We can't grow the economy unless we have that. So it's really important that we retain that alignment with the single market. That has to be the absolute minimum. And I certainly believe that if we do have an indicative votes process in Parliament over the coming weeks, that we can win that argument across party for a single market customs union option. That is the spirit of compromise that the SNP has sought to engage in over the course of the last 3 years. Customs union on its own won't do it. And also there's an additional factor, is because we all have to be aware of the responsibilities that we have to support the Good Friday Agreement in the island of Ireland. And a customs union arrangement in itself wouldn't solve the border issues that are so important and so integral to the Good Friday Agreement.
So, just to be clear, there are no circumstances that the SNP would back the customs union idea that has been put forward?
Well, what I'm arguing is that the customs union on its own doesn't satisfy the needs of our economy. It doesn't protect the service sector in Scotland, and it doesn't protect that free movement of people, which is so important. We need free movement of people if we're able to have the labour that we would require for our health services, for our tourist industry, and so on and so forth. It simply doesn't go far enough. And at the end of the day, the responsibility that we have is to protect the economic interests of the people of Scotland. That is why you need to have that partnership as an absolute minimum of membership of the single market and the customs union. It's the only way that we can do that. That is the least worst option of Brexit. There is no such thing as a good Brexit. Brexit is going to cost jobs. And our responsibility is to make sure that we stop that damage, we stop that chaos, we stop the loss of income, the loss of jobs that people in Scotland and indeed right throughout the United Kingdom will suffer from if we don't have that option.
OK, now just finally, you've said that you're not going to be attending a state dinner for Donald Trump in June. I mean, he's the US president,
Yeah.
why won't you have dinner with him?
Well, look, I think it's very important that we show due respect to the people of America and the people, and of course, of the office of the presidency itself. But of course, when we look at what President Trump has been doing, the way that he's behaved, the way he's behaved in a misogynistic manner, the way that he's trampled over the rights of minorities, the racist way in which he's behaved, it simply wouldn't be the right thing to lay out the red carpet and to sit down on the basis of a state dinner and have a pleasant evening with the President of the United States. Of course, the United Kingdom should be engaging with the US. We should be saying to President Trump that the way he is behaving, the way he's talking about building the wall and excluding people from Mexico, as an example, is simply not acceptable. And we've had a long debate this morning on your programme about climate change. The fact that President Trump is a climate change denier, that is refusing to sign up to the Paris Accord, we simply cannot support what the US President is doing. It would not be the right thing to do to be sitting down and having dinner with him.
OK, Ian Blackford, we'll let you get back to conference. Thank you for taking the time to be on the programme this morning.
Thank you.